Marcus Webb had been cleaning the United Nations Galactic Embassy for 3 years, and in that time he'd learned one fundamental truth: nobody notices the janitor. Diplomats rushed past him in the hallways, discussing treaties and trade agreements. Alien dignitaries stepped around his mop bucket without a second glance. Security personnel waved him through checkpoints with barely a nod. At 47 years old, Marcus had made peace with his invisibility. After his construction company went bankrupt during the economic collapse, after his wife left, after his daughter stopped returning his calls, he'd taken the night janitor position because it paid the bills and required no emotional investment. He showed up at 10 p.m., cleaned 6 floors of the most important building in Earth's interstellar diplomatic corps, and left at 6 a.m. Simple, predictable, safe. Tonight started like any other night. Marcus clocked in, loaded his cart with supplies, and began his rounds on the 6th floor. The embassy was quiet at this hour, most of the staff long gone. Only a skeleton crew of night shift personnel remained, monitoring communications from across the galaxy, managing the time zone chaos of dealing with hundreds of alien civilizations. Marcus worked methodically, emptying trash bins, mopping floors, wiping down conference tables where humanity's future was negotiated daily. He developed a rhythm over 3 years, a kind of meditation in the repetitive tasks. Spray, wipe, move on. Sweep, mop, repeat. His mind wandered to practical concerns. The rent was due Thursday, his truck needed an oil change, his daughter's birthday was coming up, and he wasn't sure she'd want to hear from him. He was cleaning the Valorian ambassador's office when he noticed the light. A small panel near the ambassador's desk was blinking red, pulsing with urgent rhythm. Marcus had cleaned this office hundreds of times and never seen that panel active. He should probably report it to security, but it was 2 a.m. and the security station was 3 floors down. Besides, it was probably nothing, a malfunction. These alien systems were always glitching. Marcus continued cleaning, but the blinking light nagged at him. What if it was important? What if something was wrong? He'd been invisible for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to matter, to make a difference. Almost without thinking, he approached the panel. The interface was in Valorian script, which Marcus couldn't read, but there was a button, large and obvious, still blinking red. In his experience, blinking red things usually meant you should press them to make them stop blinking. It was probably just an acknowledgement button, a "yes, I see this alert" type of thing. Marcus pressed it. Immediately, the entire panel lit up. Valorian text scrolled across the screen too fast for his translator app to catch. A 3-dimensional hologram projected from the desk, showing what looked like a star map with a particular system highlighted in angry crimson. An alarm began sounding, not loud but insistent, a rhythmic pulsing that made Marcus's heart race. "Oh no," Marcus muttered. "No, no, no, what did I do?" He frantically pressed buttons, trying to undo whatever he'd triggered, but the interface only responded with more Valorian text, more holograms, more urgent pulsing lights. The alarm grew louder. Somewhere down the hall, he heard running footsteps. In a panic, Marcus grabbed his cleaning cart and fled. He couldn't afford to lose this job. If security found him tampering with the ambassador's equipment, he'd be fired immediately, possibly arrested. He pushed his cart down the hallway, his heart hammering, looking for somewhere to hide until he could figure out what to do. He ducked into a service corridor he'd used countless times, a narrow passage that connected the main embassy floors to the maintenance areas. At the end of the corridor was a door marked "Sanitation Transport, Authorized Personnel Only." Marcus had never gone through that door before. It was for the specialized cleaning crews who serviced the alien quarters with their specific atmospheric and chemical requirements. Behind him, the footsteps were getting closer. Security was coming. Marcus made a split-second decision and pushed through the door. On the other side was a small bay with what looked like a shuttle craft, sleek and white, about the size of a large van. It was clearly designed for transporting cleaning equipment and supplies between the embassy and wherever these things went. There was a loading ramp down, the interior lit with soft white light. The footsteps were right outside the door. Without thinking, Marcus pushed his cart up the ramp and into the shuttle. He could hide here until security passed, then sneak back out and finish his shift like nothing had happened. No one would ever know. He was barely inside when the ramp began to close. Marcus lunged for it, trying to get back out, but it sealed with a hydraulic hiss. The interior lights shifted from white to blue. A holographic interface materialized in front of him, displaying Valorian text and what looked like a countdown. "No, wait," Marcus shouted, slapping at the walls. "I'm not supposed to be in here, let me out." The shuttle didn't respond to his protests. The countdown reached 0, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as the entire craft lurched upward. Through a small viewport, he watched the docking bay recede, then the embassy building, then the entire city of New York shrinking below him. He was in space. Somehow, impossibly, he was in space. Marcus sank to the floor of the shuttle, his cleaning cart rolling away and bumping into a wall. This couldn't be happening. He was a janitor. He cleaned floors. He didn't go to space. He'd never even been on an airplane without getting motion sick. The holographic interface continued displaying information he couldn't understand. Through the viewport, Earth was rapidly disappearing, replaced by the infinite black of space dotted with distant stars. Marcus tried every control surface he could find, pressing buttons, waving his hands through holographic displays, shouting at what he hoped might be a voice-activated system. Nothing worked. The shuttle continued on its predetermined course, accelerating to speeds Marcus couldn't begin to comprehend. His phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. He was in space. His translator app was useless without context. He was completely, utterly alone, hurtling toward an unknown destination in a shuttle he couldn't control. Marcus did what any reasonable person would do in his situation. He sat down, put his head in his hands, and tried not to panic. This was fine. This was probably some kind of automatic route. The shuttle would arrive at its destination, someone would realize there'd been a mistake, and they'd send him back to Earth. He'd probably be fired, might face legal charges, but at least he'd be alive and on solid ground. The journey took 6 hours, though it felt like an eternity. Marcus tried to sleep but couldn't. He paced the small shuttle, counting the supplies on his cleaning cart like prayer beads. 3 bottles of floor cleaner, 2 spray bottles of disinfectant, 1 container of industrial-strength degreaser, 4 microfiber cloths, 1 mop, 1 broom, the mundane inventory of his mundane life now somehow in space. When the shuttle finally began decelerating, Marcus pressed his face to the viewport. A planet was coming into view, smaller than Earth, with purple-tinted oceans and greenish-brown continents. Artificial structures glinted in orbit, stations, satellites, defense platforms. As they approached, Marcus could see that many of these structures were damaged, some actively burning in the airless void. This was a war zone. The shuttle dove toward the planet's surface, passing through atmosphere that rattled the hull. Marcus gripped his cleaning cart for stability, watching through the viewport as they descended toward what looked like a settlement. Buildings constructed from some kind of crystalline material covered a valley, but many were damaged, some completely destroyed. Smoke rose from multiple locations. The shuttle landed with a thump that knocked Marcus to his knees. The ramp began to open, and Marcus heard sounds from outside, shouting, weapons fire, the distinctive hum of energy shields under stress. He grabbed his cart instinctively. It was the only familiar thing in this nightmare, and slowly walked down the ramp. The scene before him was chaos. The settlement was under siege. Crystalline buildings bore scorch marks from energy weapons. In the streets, figures in powered armor rushed between cover positions, returning fire at something Marcus couldn't see beyond the settlement's perimeter. The air smelled of ozone and burning plastic. As Marcus stood frozen at the bottom of the ramp, 3 of the armored figures noticed him and rushed over. When they got close, their helmets retracted, revealing faces that were distinctly non-human. Elongated skulls, large eyes, skin that seemed to shift colors with emotion. These were Valorians, the same species as the ambassador whose panel Marcus had accidentally triggered. The lead Valorian, whose armor was decorated with rank insignia, stared at Marcus with an expression of profound relief. When they spoke, Marcus's translator app finally had something to work with. You came, Earth actually sent someone. The Valorian's voice was filled with desperate hope. We activated the emergency military aid protocol 6 hours ago, but we didn't think anyone would arrive in time. Are you advanced reconnaissance? How many troops are coming? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. These people thought he was military. They thought Earth had sent help. They thought he was a soldier, not a janitor who had accidentally launched himself into space after pressing the wrong button. He should tell them the truth, explain the mistake, apologize for giving them false hope. But as he looked around at the desperate faces, at the damaged buildings, at the distant sounds of battle, Marcus found himself saying something else entirely. "I'm the first wave," he heard himself say. "More reinforcements are coming, but I'm here now to assess the situation and provide immediate tactical support." The Valorian commander's skin shifted to a brilliant gold color. "Joy," Marcus guessed. "Praise the stars. I am Commander Veles, defending officer of Settlement 47. We've been under siege by the Krath separatists for 3 days. Our shields are at 20%. We have wounded. Our supplies are nearly exhausted." Veles looked at Marcus's cleaning cart with confusion. "Is that your equipment?" Marcus looked down at his cart, at the bottles of cleaning solution and the mop, at the most pathetic military supplies imaginable. His brain raced, trying to figure out how to explain this, how to maintain the lie he just committed to, how to avoid shattering these people's hope. "Specialized equipment," Marcus said, thinking fast. "Human military tactics. We use unconventional approaches. Where do you need me?" Over the next hour, Marcus learned the situation. Settlement 47 was a Valorian colony, home to about 2,000 civilians and a small defense force. The Krath, an aggressive neighboring species, had been attacking Valorian settlements for weeks, claiming territorial disputes. Earth had signed a mutual defense treaty with the Valorian Empire 2 years ago, but this was the first time it had been invoked. When Marcus had pressed that button in the ambassador's office, he'd accidentally confirmed Earth's response to the Valorian distress call. The shuttle he'd boarded wasn't for cleaning supplies. It was a rapid-response diplomatic transport, programmed to carry emergency aid to the colony. And now Marcus was that aid, all of it. One middle-aged janitor with a cart full of cleaning supplies. Commander Veles led him on a tour of the settlement's defenses. The Valorians had established a perimeter using energy shields and automated defense platforms, but both were failing. The Krath were using some kind of corrosive weapon that degraded the shields faster than they could regenerate. The defense platforms were offline, damaged by electromagnetic pulses. "We have maybe 6 hours before the shields fail completely," Veles explained. "When that happens, the Krath will overrun us. We've been trying to evacuate civilians, but our transport ships were destroyed in the initial assault. We're trapped." Marcus nodded, trying to look thoughtful and tactical rather than terrified and completely out of his depth. He'd served in the army for 2 years right out of high school, but that was almost 30 years ago, and he'd been a supply clerk, not combat infantry. His military experience consisted primarily of organizing inventory and avoiding officers. But he'd been a janitor for decades, and janitors knew things. They understood chemistry, knew how different substances interacted, could look at a space and figure out how to clean it, which meant understanding how dirt and grime spread, how liquids flowed, how to prevent contamination. Maybe that knowledge was worth something here. "The corrosive weapon," Marcus said. "What exactly does it do to your shields?" Veles pulled up a holographic display showing shield integrity data. "It's some kind of acidic compound suspended in an energy matrix. When it hits the shields, it creates a chemical reaction that degrades the energy lattice. We've tried reinforcing the shields, but it just accelerates the degradation." Marcus studied the data, recognizing patterns he'd seen in his work. The way the degradation spread, the chemistry of the interaction, it reminded him of how certain cleaning solvents interacted with floor finishes. If you used the wrong cleaner on the wrong surface, you could create a chain reaction that stripped the finish away. "What if you neutralized the acid before it reached the shields?" Marcus asked. "Neutralized it how?" "With a base, an alkaline compound." Marcus walked over to his cleaning cart and picked up a bottle. This is industrial degreaser, highly alkaline. If we could spray a mist of this in front of your shields, it might neutralize the Krath's acid before it makes contact. Veles stared at the bottle, then at Marcus. That's brilliant. Why didn't our scientists think of that? Because your scientists probably weren't janitors, Marcus thought. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest to see. Do you have sprayer systems? Something that could create a mist barrier? We have atmospheric processors throughout the settlement. They're designed to maintain air quality, but they could be modified to spray other compounds. Veles's skin shifted to an excited purple. This could work. This could actually work. For the next 3 hours, Marcus worked with the Valorian engineers to implement his idea. They extracted the active alkaline compounds from his industrial degreaser, synthesized more using the settlement's chemical fabrication systems, and loaded the mixture into the atmospheric processors. Then they repositioned the processors to create a mist barrier just outside the shield perimeter. When the Krath launched their next assault, firing volleys of their corrosive weapons, something remarkable happened. The acid projectiles hit the alkaline mist and neutralized before reaching the shields. The chemical reaction created a visible display, clouds of vapor where acid and base canceled each other out. The shields held at 20%, the degradation stopped. From the command center, Marcus watched the Valorian defenders celebrate. Commander Veles clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture they'd learned from human cultural databases. You saved us, human. The shields will hold now. We just need to last until the Krath give up or until your reinforcements arrive. Marcus felt sick. There were no reinforcements. Earth didn't even know what had happened. He was a janitor who'd pressed the wrong button, and now an entire settlement was counting on him. But the defensive strategy had worked. Maybe he could do more. The defense platforms, Marcus said, the ones that were disabled by electromagnetic pulse, can they be repaired? Our engineers have been trying for 2 days, Veles said. The EMP scrambled their operating systems. We'd need to completely reboot them, but we can't get close enough. The Krath have the area around the platforms targeted. Anyone who approaches gets hit with weapons fire. Marcus thought about this. During his army days, he'd learned about EMP effects on electronics. He'd also spent years working around electrical systems in the buildings he cleaned, dealing with power surges and circuit breakers. What if you didn't need to approach them physically? What if you could reboot them remotely using a power surge? A controlled power surge could work, one of the Valorian engineers said, but we'd need to overload the settlement's power grid to generate enough energy. That would shut down our shields, our life support, everything. Not if you do it in sections, Marcus said. Route all power to one sector of the grid, create a massive surge, broadcast it to the nearest defense platform to reboot its systems. Once that platform is online, it can provide cover for engineers to reach and manually repair the others. The Valorians looked at each other. That's incredibly risky, Veles said. If it doesn't work, we'll have shut down our defenses for nothing. If you don't try, the shields will eventually fail anyway, Marcus pointed out. The Krath will just wait you out. Veles nodded slowly. You're right, we'll try it. The power surge experiment took another 2 hours to set up. They had to reroute the entire settlement's electrical grid, calculating precise timing and energy levels. Marcus found himself at the center of the planning, drawing on decades of experience with electrical systems, with troubleshooting, with understanding how buildings and their infrastructure worked. When they finally triggered the surge, the settlement went dark for 10 seconds. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in eerie red. Through the command center's viewport, Marcus watched as a massive electrical discharge arced from the settlement to the nearest defense platform. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the defense platform's lights came on, its weapons systems activated. It began firing at Krath positions, its automated targeting systems engaging enemies that had thought they were safe. The Valorian command center erupted in cheers. Engineers rushed out under the platforms, covering fire to begin repairing the others. Within an hour, all 6 defense platforms were online again, creating a coordinated defensive network that pushed the Krath back from the settlement perimeter. Marcus sank into a chair, exhausted. Two tactical solutions, both drawn from his experience as a janitor, and both had worked. He was starting to wonder if maybe he wasn't as out of his depth as he'd thought. Commander Veles sat beside him. Human military training must be extraordinary. You've done more in 6 hours than our best tactical officers managed in 3 days. I've had good teachers, Marcus said vaguely, thinking about the YouTube videos he'd watched about cleaning techniques, the training manuals from his army days, the decades of practical problem-solving that came with maintenance work. Tell me about Earth's military doctrine, Veles said. Your approach is unlike anything I've studied. You use common materials, civilian infrastructure, improvised solutions. It's effective but unconventional. Marcus scrambled for an answer that wouldn't reveal his fraud. Human military philosophy emphasizes adaptability, using whatever resources are available, thinking creatively rather than relying on established tactics. It wasn't entirely a lie. That was how janitors worked. You dealt with whatever situation you found, used whatever tools you had, improvised when necessary. Fascinating, Veles said. I would like to learn more. Our defenders could benefit from this mindset. Over the next 2 days, Marcus found himself accidentally teaching an alien military force to think like a janitor. He showed them how to create barriers using furniture and equipment, how to redirect water flow to create obstacles, how to use ventilation systems to distribute defensive compounds. Every solution came from years of cleaning buildings, understanding how spaces worked, knowing what materials did when combined. The Krath continued their assault, but the settlement held. The shields remained stable behind their alkaline mist barrier. The defense platforms kept the enemy at distance. And Marcus's improvised tactics closed gaps in the defense that traditional military thinking had missed. He also got to know the Valorians. Despite being aliens, they were surprisingly relatable. They had families, fears, hopes. Commander Veles had 3 children in the settlement's shelter. Engineer Thaxis had been planning to propose to their partner before the siege began. Medic release showed Marcus pictures of their garden destroyed in the first day of bombardment. These weren't just aliens whose hope he'd falsely raised. They were people, and somehow, impossibly, he was helping them survive. On the 3rd day of the siege, everything changed. Marcus was checking the atmospheric processors when alarms sounded throughout the settlement. He rushed to the command center where Commander Veles was staring at tactical displays with an expression of horror. The Krath are bringing in reinforcements, Veles said. A full battle cruiser. Our defenses can't withstand that kind of firepower. We have maybe 2 hours before they arrive. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been playing soldier, pretending he knew what he was doing, but this was beyond janitor tricks and cleaning supply chemistry. This was real military hardware, and he had no idea how to counter it. What about evacuation? He asked. Where we have no ships. Even if we did, the Krath would shoot them down. Veles's skin had gone pale gray, despair. This is the end. I'm sorry, Marcus. You fought well, but there's nothing more we can do. Marcus looked around the command center at the defeated faces. He thought about the families huddled in the shelters below, about Veles's 3 children who would never see their parent again, about Thaxis's planned proposal that would never happen. He thought about his own daughter who he hadn't spoken to in 2 years, who probably thought he was a failure and a disappointment. He'd failed at construction, failed at marriage, failed at being a father. Was he going to fail these people too? No. Show me the defense platform controls, Marcus said. What? Why? Just show me. Veles pulled up the interface. The 6 defense platforms were operating at full capacity, their automated systems firing at Krath ground positions, but they were designed for perimeter defense, not to engage capital ships. Marcus stared at the controls, thinking. He wasn't a military tactician. He didn't know anything about space warfare. But he knew about leverage, about using small forces to move large objects, about finding the weak point in a system and applying pressure. Can those platforms be manually controlled? He asked. Yes, but why would you? And can they be overloaded, made to exceed their normal operating parameters? Theoretically, but the systems would burn out. We'd lose them permanently. We're going to lose them anyway when the battle cruiser arrives, Marcus pointed out. What if we didn't use them as defensive weapons? What if we used them as projectiles? Velis's eyes widened. You want to ram a battle cruiser with defense platforms? Not ram, target. If we time it right, overload the platform's power cores and launch them at the cruiser as it enters orbit, we might be able to damage it enough to force a retreat. Or at least buy time. That's insane, Velis said. Then slowly their skin shifted to a thoughtful yellow. That's brilliantly insane. Human tactical doctrine really is unlike anything we've studied. They had 90 minutes to prepare. The defense platforms weren't designed to be mobile, but they had maneuvering thrusters for positioning adjustments. Marcus and the Valorian engineers reprogrammed the platforms to function as massive kinetic missiles, overloading their power cores to create devastating payloads. It was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever been part of. This wasn't janitor knowledge. This was desperation and improvisation and hope that anything would work. When the Krath battle cruiser appeared in orbit, it was massive. Marcus watched through the command center viewport as it hung in the sky like a malevolent moon, weapons charging, preparing to obliterate the settlement. Launch platforms 1 and 2, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. The first 2 defense platforms detached from their moorings and accelerated upward on pillars of fire. The battle cruiser's point defense systems targeted them immediately, destroying Platform 1 before it covered half the distance to orbit, but Platform 2 made it through. It slammed into the cruiser's lower hull and detonated, its overloaded power core releasing enough energy to tear a hole in the warship's armor. Platforms 3 and 4 launch. The Krath were ready this time. Their point defense was more coordinated. Platform 3 was destroyed early. Platform 4 made it closer but was intercepted before impact. 2 platforms left. The battle cruiser was damaged but still operational, still charging its primary weapons. Marcus could see the energy buildup, the telltale glow that meant they were about to fire. Platforms 5 and 6, Marcus said, launch together. Maximum thrust, everything we have. The final 2 platforms launched in unison, their trajectories slightly offset to split the cruiser's defensive fire. The Krath point defense divided its attention, trying to target both platforms simultaneously. Platform 5 took heavy damage but stayed on course, trailing debris and sparks. Platform 6 absorbed fire meant for its partner, its armor ablating under the assault. Both platforms hit the battle cruiser within milliseconds of each other. The explosion was visible even from the ground. Twin detonations that tore through the cruiser's hull, secondary explosions rippling along its length as internal systems failed. The massive ship began to list, atmosphere venting from dozens of breaches, its weapons going dark. For a moment, Marcus thought they'd destroyed it. Then the cruiser began to retreat, limping back to higher orbit, clearly unable to continue the assault. The Krath ground forces, seeing their support ship withdraw, began to pull back as well. Without the cruiser's overwhelming firepower, they couldn't break through the settlement's defenses. Within an hour, the siege was over. The Krath had retreated entirely, their separatist assault broken. The Valorian command center was pandemonium. Defenders were celebrating, embracing each other, skin colors shifting through the entire emotional spectrum. Commander Velis was crying. Marcus was surprised to learn Valorians could cry, their tears crystalline and refractive. "You saved us," Velis said, gripping Marcus's shoulders. "You brilliant, incredible human, you saved us all." Marcus felt like he was going to throw up. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the full understanding of what he'd done, what had almost gone wrong, how many people could have died if his desperate plan had failed. "I just improvised," he said weakly. "You did more than that. You showed us entirely new approaches to tactical thinking, using defense platforms as weapons, creating chemical barriers, exploiting infrastructure as tools. These are revolutionary concepts." Velis's skin shifted to determined blue. "The Valorian military needs to learn from you. Earth's military doctrine needs to be studied. You've changed warfare itself." Oh no, Marcus could see where this was going. If the Valorians reported what he'd done, Earth's military would get involved. They'd investigate. They'd discover he wasn't a soldier, just a janitor who'd pressed the wrong button. The diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. He had to come clean. Tell the truth, face the consequences. Marcus opened his mouth to confess everything, but before he could speak, new alarms sounded. This time they weren't warnings, they were celebration signals. Ships incoming, the sensor operator announced. Multiple vessels, transponders identify them as Valorian Empire Navy and Earth United Defense Force. Through the viewport, Marcus watched as a small fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel. 3 Valorian warships and 2 Earth vessels, proper military craft bristling with weapons and shield generators. The reinforcements, Veliz breathed. They actually came. The cavalry had arrived. 4 days too late. Over the next few hours, Marcus watched as proper military personnel took control of the situation. Earth officers established communications with the settlement. Valorian naval commanders assessed the damage and began organizing relief efforts. Medical teams beamed down to treat the wounded. Engineers arrived to repair infrastructure, and everyone wanted to meet the human who had held off an entire siege with cleaning supplies and improvised tactics. Marcus was escorted to a meeting with Earth's commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Chen, a stern woman in her 50s with more combat ribbons on her uniform than Marcus could count. She studied him with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Marcus Webb," she said, reading from a data pad, "according to the Valorians, you're some kind of tactical genius. Single-handedly saved this settlement, used unconventional warfare techniques that nobody's ever seen before." She looked up. "Funny thing though, I can't find you in any military database. No service record. No tactical training certification. Nothing." Marcus's mouth went dry. "Ma'am, I can explain. You're a janitor," Colonel Chen said flatly. "Night shift, United Nations Galactic Embassy. You accidentally triggered a distress response and launched yourself into a war zone in a diplomatic shuttle." There was no point denying it. "Yes, ma'am. And then you lied to these people, made them think you were military, made them think Earth had sent help." "Yes, ma'am. And then you actually helped them, saved thousands of lives. Defeated a siege using cleaning supplies and building infrastructure." Colonel Chen's expression was unreadable. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in, Mr. Webb?" "A lot, ma'am. A tremendous amount. Falsely representing yourself as military personnel, unauthorized use of diplomatic resources, reckless endangerment. The list goes on." She paused. However, that one word hung in the air like a lifeline. "However," Colonel Chen continued, "you also upheld Earth's Mutual Defense Treaty, you provided aid when aid was needed, and you achieved victory using methods that, while unorthodox, were undeniably effective." She set down her data pad. "The Valorian Empire is calling you a hero. Their news media has been broadcasting your story across their entire civilization. You're famous, Mr. Webb, Earth's first solo tactical victory in an alien conflict." "I'm not a hero," Marcus protested. "I'm just a janitor who got lucky." "Luck is a factor in warfare," Colonel Chen said, "but so is ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. You demonstrated all 3. The question is, what do we do with you now?" Before Marcus could respond, Commander Veliz entered the meeting room, accompanied by a Valorian Marcus didn't recognize, an elderly individual wearing elaborate robes covered in symbols. "Colonel Chen," Veliz said formally, "may I present High Admiral Corthan, Supreme Commander of the Valorian Empire Navy." The High Admiral studied Marcus with ancient, wise eyes. When they spoke, their voice carried weight and authority. "Marcus Webb, the human who saved Settlement 47, I have reviewed Commander Veliz's report. I have seen recordings of your tactical decisions. I have studied your methods." They paused. "I wish to understand, how did you develop such unique approaches to warfare?" Marcus looked at Colonel Chen, who gave him a slight nod, permission to speak honestly. "I didn't, sir," Marcus said. "I mean, your admiralness, I don't know military tactics. I'm a janitor. I clean buildings. Everything I did here was just janitor knowledge, chemistry from cleaning solutions, understanding how buildings and systems work, improvising with whatever was available. I was just doing my job, except my job happened to be in a war zone." The High Admiral's skin shifted through several colors. Finally, they made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. "A janitor, of course. Only humans would send a janitor to fight a war and have him win." They turned to Colonel Chen. Your species continues to surprise us, Colonel. I thought I understood human military doctrine, but clearly I was mistaken. With respect, Admiral, Colonel Chen said carefully, Mr. Webb doesn't represent our military doctrine. He's a civilian who acted independently, and yet his actions were effective. More effective in some ways than traditional military approaches would have been. Perhaps that is the lesson. The High Admiral turned back to Marcus. Mr. Webb, the Valorian Empire wishes to honor you. We are awarding you the Star of Valor, our highest civilian honor for courage under fire. We are also requesting that Earth allow you to serve as a consultant to our military academies, teaching your janitor tactics to our officers. Marcus felt dizzy. I don't think I'm qualified to teach anyone anything, sir. Neither did I, the High Admiral said. When I was young, I was a sanitation engineer on a military vessel, what you would call a janitor. I learned more about ship systems from cleaning them than I ever learned in tactical school. That knowledge served me throughout my career. They smiled, skin shifting to warm gold. Never underestimate the strategic value of understanding how things actually work, Mr. Webb. The meeting concluded with Marcus being officially recognized as a civilian contractor providing emergency military consulting services. It was a legal fiction that allowed everyone to save face. Earth hadn't sent a janitor to fight a war, they'd sent an unconventional tactical consultant. The Valorians got their hero. Earth avoided diplomatic embarrassment, and Marcus got a promotion he'd never asked for. Over the next week, as Settlement 47 began its recovery process, Marcus found himself in the strange position of explaining janitor logic to military officers from two different civilizations. He taught them about chemical interactions, about using civilian infrastructure for defensive purposes, about thinking in terms of maintenance and problem-solving rather than just weapons and tactics. The Valorian officers were fascinated. Human officers were skeptical but couldn't argue with results. Marcus felt like a fraud the entire time, but he kept teaching because these people had trusted him when it mattered, and he owed them his best effort. He also spent time with the civilian population of Settlement 47. They treated him like a celebrity, which was deeply uncomfortable. Parents brought their children to meet him. Artists created holographic portraits. Someone even started selling souvenirs, Marcus action figures, which looked nothing like him but featured him heroically wielding a mop like a weapon. "This is insane," Marcus muttered to Commander Veles, watching a group of younglings play with toys based on his improvised defense tactics. "You're a symbol," Veles explained, "of Earth's commitment to our alliance, of human ingenuity. Of the fact that anyone, regardless of background, can make a difference when it matters." They paused. "Also, those action figures are actually accurate to your most effective weapon. You did save us primarily through intelligent application of cleaning chemistry." Marcus couldn't argue with that. His daughter called. Somehow the news had reached Earth, and Sarah had seen her father's face broadcast across every major news network. The conversation was awkward at first. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, but Sarah's voice was different than he remembered, less judgmental, almost proud. "Dad, I can't believe you fought aliens with a mop," she said, and Marcus could hear her smiling. "It was more complicated than that," Marcus protested weakly. "I know, I read the reports. You used chemistry and infrastructure knowledge and practical problem solving. You did what you've always done. You figured out how to fix things with whatever you had available. I guess I never realized that was a skill worth respecting." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I thought I was just a janitor. I thought I'd failed at everything important." "You saved 2,000 people, Dad. That seems pretty important to me." They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had since Sarah was a teenager. She told him about her life, her job as a chemical engineer, her recent engagement. Marcus told her about the siege, about being terrified every moment, about somehow stumbling through because stopping would mean people would die. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said before they disconnected. "I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you." Marcus sat in his temporary quarters after the call, staring at nothing, processing emotions he'd buried for years. Maybe he wasn't a failure. Maybe different kinds of success existed, and some of them didn't look like what he'd expected. The Earth Defense Force wanted him too, it turned out. Colonel Chen approached him on his 8th day at Settlement 47 with a proposal. "We're establishing a new training division," she explained. "Unconventional tactical solutions, teaching soldiers to think creatively, to use civilian resources to approach problems from non-military perspectives. We want you to lead it." Marcus stared at her. "You want a janitor to train soldiers? I want someone who can look at a cleaning bottle and see a defensive weapon. Someone who can turn a building's infrastructure into a tactical advantage. Someone who can improvise victory from failure." Colonel Chen smiled slightly. "Also, frankly, after what happened here, if we don't offer you a position, the Valorians will, and I'd rather keep Earth's accidental tactical genius working for Earth." "I'm not a genius," Marcus protested. "I just know how to clean things. Mr. Webb, I've been in the military for 30 years. I've seen dozens of tactical approaches, studied hundreds of historical battles. What you did here was unprecedented. Not because it was complicated, but because it was simple. You thought about fundamental principles, chemistry, physics, infrastructure instead of weapons and formations. That's valuable." "That's worth teaching." Marcus thought about it. A real job, a salary better than janitorial work, a chance to make a difference beyond mopping floors, a way to prove to his daughter, to himself, that he was more than his failures. "I'll need to finish my notice at the embassy," Marcus said. "I don't want to leave them without cleaning staff." Colonel Chen actually laughed. "Mr. Webb, you accidentally saved an alien civilization. I think the embassy will forgive you for quitting early." The return to Earth was ceremonial and overwhelming. Marcus's shuttle was escorted by military vessels. News crews waited at the landing pad. Government officials made speeches about human-Valorian cooperation. The Valorian ambassador, the same one whose office Marcus had accidentally triggered, personally thanked him for upholding Earth's treaty obligations. Marcus endured it all with the same patience he'd learned from years of cleaning while people ignored him. Except now they were paying attention, and he found he preferred being invisible. His apartment seemed smaller than he remembered. 3 years of living alone in a cheap studio, coming home after night shifts to sleep through the day, had made the space feel like just a place to exist. Now it felt inadequate. He'd saved thousands of lives and returned to a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of bleach. Sarah visited the next day, bringing her fiancé, a nervous young man named David who shook Marcus's hand with excessive enthusiasm. They had dinner at a real restaurant, the kind Marcus usually avoided because of the cost. Sarah paid, insisting it was a celebration. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked over dessert. "You're famous, you have job offers. What are you going to do?" Marcus thought about the question. What did he want? For 3 years, he'd wanted nothing except to get through each day. Now he had options, opportunities, a second chance at having a life that mattered. "I'm going to teach," he said. "Colonel Chen offered me a position training soldiers to think like janitors. It sounds ridiculous, but maybe ridiculous is what we need sometimes." "That's perfect for you, Dad," Sarah said. "You've always been good at explaining how things work, showing people the practical way to solve problems. I remember when you taught me about chemical reactions using household cleaners." Marcus had forgotten that. Sarah, age 10, fascinated by how vinegar and baking soda created a volcanic reaction. He'd spent an afternoon teaching her about acids and bases, showing her how different combinations produced different results. That same knowledge had saved Settlement 47. Maybe nothing was ever wasted. Maybe every experience, every skill, every bit of knowledge learned had value, even if you couldn't see it yet. The Unconventional Tactical Solutions Division started with 12 students, soldiers hand-picked for creative thinking and practical problem-solving abilities. Marcus's first class was in a converted warehouse that smelled like concrete and ambition. He stood in front of his students in civilian clothes. He'd refused to wear a uniform he hadn't earned and looked at their expectant faces. They were young, trained, confident, everything he wasn't. "I'm Marcus Webb," he began. "I'm a janitor. I have 2 years of Army supply clerk experience from 30 years ago. I have no combat training, no tactical certification, no business teaching this class." The students exchanged glances, confusion evident. But I do know how to solve problems with limited resources. I know how chemistry works. I understand infrastructure and systems, and apparently that knowledge is valuable in warfare. Marcus picked up a spray bottle of floor cleaner from the table beside him. This is my weapon, not a gun, not a missile, not any traditional military equipment. This bottle of cleaning solution helped me save 2,000 lives. He had their attention now. War isn't always about overwhelming force. Sometimes it's about understanding how things work and exploiting that knowledge. Sometimes it's about looking at civilian objects and seeing tactical opportunities. Sometimes it's about being willing to try something that sounds ridiculous because conventional approaches have failed. Marcus spent the next 6 months teaching soldiers to think like maintenance workers. He taught them chemistry, showing how common household substances could be combined for tactical purposes. He taught them about building systems, demonstrating how HVAC, plumbing, and electrical infrastructure could be used or disabled. He taught them to improvise, to look at a space and see not just cover and firing positions, but ventilation routes, structural weaknesses, resource opportunities. Some students struggled with the unconventional approach. Others thrived. Marcus found he enjoyed teaching more than he'd expected. There was satisfaction in watching someone's face light up when they understood a new concept, when they made a connection between civilian knowledge and tactical application. The Valorian Empire sent observers to the program. They took detailed notes, recorded lectures, asked endless questions. Some of Marcus's techniques were incorporated into Valorian military training. The High Admiral sent periodic messages updating Marcus on how janitor tactics were being received by the Empire's officers. "You've changed our military doctrine," one message said. "Not completely, but significantly. We're teaching our officers to think beyond traditional weapons, to consider environmental and infrastructural factors. We're calling it the Webb method. You're part of our military history now." Marcus didn't know how to feel about that. He'd just been trying to survive, trying to help, trying not to let people down. Now he was somehow a historical figure in an alien civilization's military records. A year after the settlement's liberation, Marcus returned to Settlement 47 for the anniversary celebration. The colony had been rebuilt, stronger than before. Buildings that had been damaged were now reinforced. The defense grid had been upgraded. The Krath separatists had agreed to a peace treaty, partially because they'd learned that attacking Valorian settlements meant facing both Valorian and human forces, and humans fought in ways they couldn't predict. Commander Veles met him at the landing pad, skin shifting to warm gold in greeting. "Marcus, welcome back. The settlement is eager to see you." The celebration was overwhelming. Thousands of Valorians lined the streets, their skin colors shifting through happy patterns. They'd erected a monument, a statue of Marcus holding not a weapon but a mop, standing protectively over the settlement. It was ridiculous and touching, and Marcus had to excuse himself to cry in private for a few minutes. He visited the families he'd helped save, saw Veles's 3 children, now a year older and safe, attended Thaxus's wedding. They'd delayed it to make sure Marcus could attend. Walked through Rillis's rebuilt garden, more beautiful than the original. These people were alive because of what he'd done. Real people with real lives, continuing because a janitor had pressed the wrong button and then refused to give up. On his last night at the settlement, Marcus stood in the spot where he'd first arrived, where he'd looked at desperate faces and decided to lie rather than destroy their hope. Veles joined him, standing quietly beside him. "Do you regret it?" Veles asked. "Coming here, everything that happened?" Marcus thought about the question. He'd been terrified. He'd lied to people who trusted him. He'd improvised desperately while having no idea if anything would work. He'd risked thousands of lives on hunches based on cleaning chemicals and building maintenance. "No," he said, "I don't regret it. I regret that people were in danger. I regret that anyone had to fight at all, but I don't regret trying to help." "You did more than try," Veles said. "You succeeded, and you taught us something important. That value comes from unexpected places. That the person who cleans the floors might see solutions that trained warriors miss. That every type of knowledge, every experience, every skill has potential worth." Marcus smiled. "I think I learned that lesson too." 2 years after the accidental launch into space, Marcus stood in the same United Nations Galactic Embassy where his adventure had begun. But this time, he wasn't pushing a cleaning cart. He was giving a presentation to the Galactic Relations Committee about cross-cultural military cooperation and the value of unconventional tactical thinking. His former supervisor from the janitorial department sat in the audience, looking stunned. The Valorian ambassador sat in the front row, skin shifting through proud colors. Colonel Chen stood at the back, arms crossed, nodding approvingly at key points. And Sarah sat beside her fiancé, now husband, in the third row, smiling at her father with pride. In conclusion, Marcus said, wrapping up his presentation, the lesson of Settlement 47 isn't that janitors should fight wars. It's that we limit ourselves when we only value traditional expertise. Every person has knowledge worth sharing. Every experience teaches something useful. The key is being open to learning from unexpected sources. The applause was genuine, enthusiastic. Marcus accepted it with the same awkward humility he developed over years of being invisible. He still wasn't comfortable with attention, but he'd learned to endure it. After the presentation, he walked through the embassy's 6th floor, past the Valorian ambassador's office where this had all started. Someone else was cleaning now, a young woman with headphones, mopping floors with the same efficient rhythm Marcus had once used. She didn't notice him pass. She was invisible, just doing her job, probably thinking about rent and car repairs and personal worries. Marcus wondered what knowledge she had, what skills she developed, what value she could provide if given the chance. He made a mental note to talk to Colonel Chen about recruiting janitors for the Unconventional Tactical Solutions program. If one janitor could change military doctrine, what could a dozen do? What could 100? Marcus left the embassy and stepped into the cool evening air. Somewhere above, the stars were shining, though you couldn't see them through the city lights. Out there were the Valorians, the Krath, dozens of other species, all learning to coexist, all contributing their unique knowledge to the galactic civilization. And Earth was part of that now, represented not just by diplomats and soldiers, but by janitors and engineers and teachers and everyone who had knowledge worth sharing. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Sarah. "Hey, Dad," she answered. "Great presentation. You heading home?" "Actually, I was thinking about getting dinner. You and David free?" "Always. Where do you want to go?" Marcus smiled. "Anywhere but the usual place. I think it's time to try something new." "That's very unlike you," Sarah said, laughter in her voice. "The dad I knew always picked the same restaurant." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, "I've learned that sometimes the best things come from trying approaches you never expected, from being willing to step outside your comfort zone. From accepting that you don't have to be an expert to make a difference." "Sounds like someone's been giving too many inspirational speeches," Sarah teased. "Maybe, but it's true. I spent 3 years thinking I was a failure because I wasn't doing anything important. Then I accidentally saved an alien civilization using floor cleaner and ventilation systems. Turns out importance comes in unexpected forms." "So dinner at the new Thai place?" Sarah suggested. "I hear they're excellent." "Perfect," Marcus said. "See you in 20 minutes. He ended the call and started walking, just a middle-aged former janitor with an unlikely story and an unexpected second chance at life. Behind him, the UN Galactic Embassy rose into the evening sky, its windows glowing with light and activity. Inside, people were negotiating treaties, establishing trade agreements, building relationships with alien civilizations. Important work done by important people. But Marcus knew something they were still learning. Everyone had value, everyone had knowledge worth sharing, everyone could make a difference when it mattered. Sometimes you just had to press the wrong button and see where it took you. Sometimes you just had to trust that your strange, specific, seemingly useless knowledge would be exactly what was needed. Sometimes you just had to be willing to help, even when you had no idea what you were doing. Marcus had been a janitor, a failed businessman, an absent father, an invisible person just trying to get through each day. Now he was a consultant, a teacher, a hero to an alien civilization, a person his daughter was proud of. He hadn't changed who he was, he just discovered that who he was had always been enough. The stars were up there, invisible beyond the city lights but present nonetheless. Out there was Settlement 47, rebuilt and thriving. Out there was a future where humans and aliens worked together, learned from each other, built something better than either could create alone. And Marcus Webb, former janitor, accidental hero, had helped make that future possible with nothing more than cleaning supplies, practical knowledge, and the refusal to give up when people needed him. Not bad for someone who'd just been trying to do his job. The end. If you made it to the end, thank you for reading this story about an ordinary person who became extraordinary not by changing who he was, but by discovering the value in what he'd always known. Marcus's journey shows that every skill matters, every experience has worth, and heroism comes in unexpected forms. Drop a comment about what you thought, and subscribe for more HFY stories celebrating human ingenuity, determination, and the courage to try even when success seems impossible.